Now it's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Now, despite North Korea launching a stream of missile tests in recent weeks, inter-Korean relations seem to be getting back on track. The South and North resumed their routine contact over cross-border hotlines this week, renewing hopes of restarting efforts to build peace on the peninsula. Over the past month, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has shown a relatively dovish posture towards South Korea, giving the green light to restore the communication lines, while his younger sister hinted that Pyongyang may hold dialogue with the South, but only if it plays its cards right. At the same time, the regime proceeded with its weapons testing and development, boasting of new missile capabilities from railroad carriage systems to hypersonic models. To make sense of these rather mixed messages and whether the recent developments indicate real rapprochement between the South and North, we turn to Evans Revere, Senior Director at the Albright Stonebridge Group, who served as the United States Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs. We're also joined by Jung Kim, Associate Professor of the University of North Korean Studies. Very warm welcome to you both. And, well, we've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's start with you, Mr. Revere. Now, it seems that inter-Korean relations have been improving in recent days as the two Koreas reconnected their communication line on Monday. But we've seen this all before. Do you think this rapprochement is going to last?
Well, I think caution is in order in terms of any conclusion that things are actually getting better. The latest moves by North Korea, including the reopening of the communication links, are, in my view, purely tactical. They're part of Pyongyang's ongoing effort to try to take advantage of Seoul's eagerness, South Korea's eagerness, some call it desperation, to restart North-South dialogue, to hold another North-South summit at some point in the next several weeks or months, and to try to get Pyongyang to agree to an end of war declaration. So North Korea sees this eagerness on Seoul's part and is trying to take advantage of it.
And Dr. Kim, your thoughts on this? North Korea, it seems to have been extending an olive branch with conditions, of course, towards the South in recent days. What do you think the North really wants out of its engagement with South Korea? And do you think that this rapprochement is going to last?
So, first of all, the ultimate goal of the North Korea to make some rapprochement with the South Korea is to, first of all, driving a wedge between the South Korea and the United States, and that's first goal. And second, the driving a wedge between the progressives and the conservative in the South Korean domestic audiences here. So, as Mr. Evans said, this is purely tactical, the transition. So I'm not that pessimistic about the prospect of this the rapprochement in the near future here.
Well, Mr. Revere, mending ties with South Korea, for the North, it's tended to come as a step towards engagement with the US, which is its larger goal. What do you think the North wants to get out of engaging with Seoul this time around?
Well, I would say that the goal of Pyongyang is not to mend ties with South Korea. I think we can see the goals in two ways. Number one, there are a set of three goals, one of which is to try to tame, some people call it, South Korea, and get South Korea to respond positively to the North's initiatives. A second element here is to get South Korea to accept that North Korea's missile and nuclear tests are purely defensive. And we've heard that from North Korea if you read between the lines of what they're actually asking South Korea for. And I think the North Koreans also want to get Seoul to end U.S.-South Korea military exercises by convincing Seoul to try to pressure Washington to end these exercises. But there's another level, a more fundamental level of goals that are operating here, and they were alluded to by my colleague, Professor Kim. The ultimate goal is indeed to drive a wedge between South Korea and Washington, to weaken the U.S.-South Korea alliance, end those exercises, and if possible, to actually end the alliance and get U.S. troops off the Korean Peninsula. That is where North Korea is ultimately hoping to head.
And Dr. Kim, the regime leader Kim Jong-un's sister Kim Yo-jong, she named the conditions that the North would, what we would want to see before considering resuming dialogue with the South, which were to end what it called double standards, hostile policies and hostile words and actions. What do you make of these three conditions that Kim Yo-jong demanded?
So that's the classic demand of North Korea whenever they try to reopen the dialogue with the South Korea. This is not that a surprise for the South Koreans, but at the same time, for the Moon Jae-in government, that is very impatient about the reopening of the dialogue with North Korea as the approaching to the end of the tenure here. So I think the North Korea tried to exploit this impatience of the Moon Jae-in government to get some the advantageous position in negotiating with the South Korea here.
And Mr. Rivera, it's clear that the North has been seeking recognition as a nuclear state, and it's, of course, as you pointed out earlier, that it's defended its latest provocations as a right to self-defense. And well, President Biden, he's been saying that he's said that he's not going to give Kim Jong-un the recognition that he wants. What is the significance of being recognized as a nuclear state for both sides? And do you think the North's antics are going to continue to get worse?
Well, I think the North Koreans want to be accepted, if not formally recognized, as a nuclear weapons power. I think it's important to understand here that Pyongyang believes that it can both keep its nuclear weapons and get rid of international sanctions. And Pyongyang's current approach towards Seoul and Washington aims to achieve this goal, if possible, with South Korea's assistance. And I think that explains, at least in part, the outreach to Seoul. And I think the North Koreans will continue to press forward along these lines, stopping short of major provocations like a nuclear test or a long-range ballistic missile test, because I think they realize that there's a tremendous downside to doing that, because it would blow up any efforts at diplomacy with the United States and possibly also with South Korea.
And Dr. Kim, both Seoul and Washington have been very eager to restart talks with the North, and they've their nuclear envoys, they've been speaking to each other and exploring a lot of options in how to go forward. But how far do you think South Korea and the US should go in order to engage with North Korea?
So I think the Biden administration have set a very clear path toward the condition of the resuming the U.S.-North Korea dialogue here. That is the unconditional for the as the condition here. So unconditional means here the Washington does not have any intention to make further concession to just resume the dialogue here. So that kind of some posture seems to the Pyongyang, as they said, some hostile policy here. So this is some parallel stance of U.S. and the North Korea. So I don't expect that in the near future, the United States and the North Korea will get together to have another round of the denuclearization negotiation in the near future here.
And Mr. Rivera, it's of course critical that the two allied countries, South Korea and the US, are always on the same page, but it seems that they aren't when it comes to the question of lifting sanctions on the North. What do you think the US's conditions would be for it to actually consider the idea of waiving sanctions?
I think the United States would need something very clear, very definitive, and something quite irreversible in terms of denuclearization in order to go down that path. I don't rule out the possibility that the United States might at some point during a forthcoming negotiation with North Korea agree to some sort of easing or snapback mechanism on easing sanctions. But in order to get to that point, we're going to have to see something very significant from the North Koreans in terms of movement on denuclearization. And thus far, not only have we not seen that, we've seen quite the opposite. North Korea is more committed to its nuclear weapons status than it's ever been before. I see no indication that the North Koreans have any interest in pursuing denuclearization.
And Dr. Kim, well, many would say that some engagement is better than no engagement at all. But, well, the question is the matter of time, really. And now that the inter-Korean communication channels have been restored, South Korean officials, they want to arrange video conference meetings between the two sides, and they want to obviously deepen their engagement. How far do you think they could go, especially before the presidential elections in South Korea next year?
So for North Korean, once again, this kind of the approach is somehow tactical in the sense that if the South Korea accept the conditions offered by North Korean, then the Pyongyang will continue this momentum of the dialogue here. But if the Pyongyang think that the North Korean government is no longer effective to maintaining some conditions that is made with the North Korea, then they suddenly lose the interest in maintaining this kind of connection here. So once again, I don't think that the Pyongyang recognized that the tenure of the Moon Jae-in government is approaching to end here. So any kind of commitment the Moon Jae-in government would make, that the duration of that commitment has to be very short. In that sense, the Pyongyang would not take the commitment by the Moon Jae-in government very seriously here.
Mr. Rivett, it's been one of President Moon Jae-in's goals to iron out an end-of-war declaration between the South and North and other parties involved. But is the US as keen as the South to have an end-of-war declaration?
I think the two allies are indeed on separate pages here when it comes to an end-of-war declaration. I don't detect any enthusiasm in Washington for this idea. Simply declaring an end to the Korean War while North Korea remains a hostile nuclear-armed power would be quite foolish. It would essentially be accepting North Korea as a nuclear power in perpetuity. I don't think the United States is prepared to do that by declaring an end to the Korean War while North Korea remains a nuclear weapons state, which it in effect is. Would be locking in North Korea's nuclear status, and North Korea would no longer have an incentive to denuclearize. And so I don't think the United States is enthusiastic about that. And in addition, an end-of-war declaration would almost certainly be used by North Korea as a way of weakening the rationale for the U.S. military presence on the Korean Peninsula. And they would push very, very hard in the aftermath of such a declaration for the removal of U.S. forces and the end of the U.S. military presence and alliance with South Korea.
Well, Dr. Kim, meanwhile, Seoul officials, they remain quite optimistic about having high-level talks. And of course, there's been talk of the two Koreas entering the Beijing Olympics together. But would it be possible to create that kind of atmosphere and also the international support behind the sides in just a matter of months?
Of course, there's a possibility that the South Korea and North Korea have some new round of talks at the moment of the Beijing Olympics. Only if the North Korean athlete can join the event here. As you know, the North Korea is very, very hypersensitive to the COVID-19 pandemic, and they don't have the sufficient infrastructure, especially the public health infrastructure, to contain this pandemic here. So if North Korean could not get some effective solution for the danger of the pandemic thing here, then still the North Koreans are very, very vulnerable to the outside possibility of the infection here. So that's the possibility. But with the condition that the North Korean anyhow find out some effective solution for the COVID-19 pandemic. Otherwise, it is just wishful thinking of the, say, the Moon Jae-in government or the others here.
Mr. Rivera, North Korea's rather dovish stance seen in recent days comes amid some significant developments in the Indo-Pacific region. And while North Korea has shown opposition to the formation of the AUKUS Pact formed between the UK, the US and Australia, do you think this is going to push the regime closer to China?
It's hard to imagine North Korea getting any closer to China than it already is. I think North Korea is looking at this new development in the Asia-Pacific region with concern. Part of that concern is that it wants to maintain solidarity with its Chinese ally and partner. China is obviously very incensed about this new development, and so it's natural for North Korea to support the Chinese. But I also think that the North Koreans looking down the road at an increased naval capability by the Australians, a steadfast United States ally, also a country that fought in the Korean War. I think the North Koreans are looking at that capability with some concern that has nothing to do with China and a lot to do with themselves at some point in the future. So for those two reasons, I think the North Koreans are not enthusiastic, to say the least, about this new development.
And Dr. Kim, North Korea over the past months, it's been showcasing its new missile capabilities. How much of a threat does this pose to South Korea and the US?
Thus far, the North Korea's provocation, especially in regard with the ballistic missile, is not across the red line, so-called here. So, but at the same time, this kind of the ballistic missile test is the apparent violation of the resolution made by the UN Security Council here. So in that sense, this is the threat toward not only the South Korea, but also for the international society as well. But at the same time, we don't have to be overly sensitive to this kind of the classic cycles of the provocation and the try to reopening the negotiation with the South Korea. So just the South Korean government need to have the robust different posture and do not overly sensitive about this sort of the provocation and just be patient about the future provocation so that we can have better position to reopening the negotiation with North Korea.
And Mr. Rivera, before we go, what do you think would be the correct response from the US government in light of these recent missile provocations?
Well, I think taking this to the Security Council, as the United States did the other day, and working with allies and partners, keeping the pressure on, making it extremely clear to the North Koreans that we find these activities unacceptable. And some of them are clearly violations of UN Security Council resolutions. I think the North Koreans need to be reminded of that. And I think the United States, as it just did just a day or so ago, call for all parties to keep the sanctions regime as strong as possible on North Korea. All those steps that have been taken I think are the right ones, and I just think the United States needs to continue to emphasize international solidarity and a refusal to accept North Korea as a de facto nuclear weapon state.
Well, that's all we have time for today. That was Evans Rivera, Senior Director at the Albridge Stonebridge Group, and John Kim, Associate Professor of the University of North Korean Studies. Thank you both so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.